A pregnant woman runs until the saliva thickens in her throat, collapsing beneath a stunted desert shrub. That weight sometimes. But if you look closer at the actual Hebrew words used for these wastelands, at what happens on, they must pass away, burying their bones in the limestone ridges, so that a generation born entirely under the open sky can learn to walk into the land. The nation learns to listen in the Midbar, but centuries later, the nation will forget. They will build their own walled cities, crown their own corrupt kings, and recreate the exact noise of Egypt right inside the promised land. And when the noise becomes deafening, God will not send an army to fix it. He will send a single man running back into the silence. The text of 1 Kings 19 documents a terrifying reality about the limits of the human nervous system. The prophet Elijah does not flee into the desert because he just lost a battle. He runs into the wasteland because he just won the greatest spiritual victory of his life. And the sheer adrenaline of the confrontation has completely hollowed him out. He stood on the peak of Mount Carmel, watched fire consume a water-soaked altar, and sprinted ahead of a king's chariot through a torrential rainstorm. But the moment the corrupt political system pushes back, the moment Queen Jezebel sends a single, calculated death threat, the prophet's psychological resilience shatters. He walks a day's journey into the brutal, sun-baked landscape of the Negev. He sits under a broom tree, feeling the rough bark against his spine. The other side of the sand, you start to see something the punishment reading completely misses. The wilderness is not a sentence, and he asks the creator of the universe to stop his heart. He is completely convinced that he is the only faithful man left on earth, trapped in a heavy Messiah complex that has finally crushed his will to live. Most religious traditions treat this moment as a lapse in faith, assuming the prophet just needs to pray harder or find more courage. But God does not respond to profound exhaustion with a theological lecture. He responds with a meal. An angel touches the sleeping prophet in the dirt. He provides a jar of cool water and the smell of fresh bread, baking on hot desert stones. He lets him eat. And then he lets the prophet sleep again. The sleep under the broom tree is not a sign of spiritual failure. It is the physical prerequisite for divine revelation. Only after his body is restored does Elijah walk 40 days and 40 nights, deeper into the Midbar, arriving at Mount Horeb, the exact same mountain where Moses once stood. He stands at the mouth of a dark cave. A wind tears the mountains apart, shattering heavy rocks across the ridge. An earthquake shakes the limestone under his feet. A fire sweeps across the horizon, but the text explicitly notes that God is not in the noise. He is in the sound of sheer silence. The wilderness was the only environment quiet enough to strip away Elijah's desperate need for dramatic, fiery victories. It is a forge. The real question of these empty landscapes isn't, "How long until I get out?" It is this: the isolation forced him to realize that the divine presence does not always operate through overwhelming force, but often moves in the quietest, most imperceptible ways. The prophet had to be unmade in the desert, so he could learn to hear the whisper. But there is one more historical journey into the sand. And this time, the man walking into the heat does not need to have his pride burned away. The water drips from his skin. The sky tears open. The voice claims him as a son. And then, the narrative pivots sharply. The Spirit does not lead him to a throne in Jerusalem. The Spirit drives him straight into the sand. He walks into the Judean desert. The limestone cliffs rise like jagged teeth against the blinding blue sky. The wind howls through the narrow, dry ravines. The heat vibrates off the white rock, baking the earth into a fine, choking dust. There is no manna falling from the sky here. There is no water exploding from a flint rock. There is only 40 days of unbroken silence. There is the quiet, violent gnawing of starvation in his stomach. Matthew records this in chapter 4. The Greek word he uses for this landscape is eremos. It means a desolate, uncultivated, solitary place. What is being made in the dark? We are a species terrified of the empty spaces. When the resource is dry, a place completely abandoned by human civilization. But Jesus is not abandoned. He is walking onto a battlefield. He is stepping into the exact same geography where his ancestors failed. He is facing the exact same test that broke the first generation of Israelites. The tempter arrives in the heat. He does not come with a sword. He does not come with an army. He comes with a question. He points to the smooth, round limestone rocks scattered across the desert floor. In this region, they look exactly like small, freshly baked loaves of bread. He tells the starving king to eat. He tells him to use his power to bypass the pain. He offers a shortcut out of the wilderness. He offers a crown without a cross. Centuries earlier, Israel stood in a desert just like this. They felt the hunger. They demanded bread. They panicked. They bowed to a golden calf because the silence was too heavy and the wait was too long. But this king does not panic. He stands his ground on the cracked earth. He looks at the stones. He feels the starvation tearing at his own flesh. And he speaks. He quotes the book of Deuteronomy. He uses the exact words given to Israel in their own desert wandering. He starves, but he holds the line. The tempter pivots. He offers the kingdoms of the world. He offers angels catching him in midair. Jesus rejects it all. Up, and the voices of approval go quiet. Panic sets in. We assume that barrenness means abandonment. We believe that. The 40 days are not a punishment for a wandering soul. They are the proof of an unbreakable king. Israel was shattered by the wilderness. Moses was humbled by it. Elijah was exhausted by it. But Jesus conquers the Eremos. He takes the definitive landscape of human failure and turns it into the exact staging ground for a cosmic victory. He walks out of the desert, his body weak, but carrying the unhindered power of the Spirit. The king has conquered the sand, but the psychological architecture of the desert does not disappear. It just changes shape. And eventually, you will have to walk into it. We are a species terrified of the quiet. We have built an entire civilization designed to ensure we never have to sit alone in the dark. You can feel it in the heavy vibration of a notification against your leg, the harsh blue glow of a screen at 2 a.m, the constant, low-grade hum of audio streaming directly into your ears while you walk. We consume noise to numb the anxiety of existence. We equate constant motion with progress, and we interpret absolute silence as a profound threat to our survival. But the biblical text diagnoses this human condition with terrifying precision. It understands that you cannot forge a new identity. If we are wandering, we must have taken a wrong turn. So we scramble to build a quick exit back, in a space crowded by the demands of an empire. As long as you are surrounded by the architecture of your own success, the job titles, the social circles, the predictable routines, you will always rely on them to tell you who you are. The ego is endlessly fed by the applause of the crowd, so the crowd has to be removed. When you experience a sudden loss of income, the collapse of a relationship, or the slow, agonizing erosion of a long-held dream, the nervous system panics. The artificial support structures are kicked away. You feel the cold sweat on your palms. Your chest tightens. The immediate human assumption is always that a mistake has been made, that you took a wrong turn, or that God is exacting a penalty for some hidden failure. But the pattern of the text demands a completely different reading. The isolation is not a punishment for a lack of faith. It is the required environment for the death of the ego. In the psychological architecture of the forge, the heat is not applied to destroy the metal. The heat is applied to burn away the impurities that the metal picked up while sitting in the world. Hagar had to lose the protection of Abram's tent to discover that she was seen by God. Moses had to lose the heavy gold of his royal signet ring to learn how to hold a wooden staff to comfort. But the biblical text does not treat the desert as an accident. Across thousands of years and dozens, Israel had to lose the predictable slavery of Egypt to learn how to walk as free people. Elijah had to lose the adrenaline of the roaring crowd to hear the whisper in the cave. The desert starves the false self until the true self is the only thing left breathing. The stripping feels like death because, in a very real sense, something is actually dying. The version of you that relied on the empire is being systematically dismantled in the sand. But acknowledging the purpose of the forge does not make the heat any less painful. And when you are actually standing in the middle of it, staring at a barren horizon, the only thing that matters is what you do next. An abused runaway wept by a desolate spring, and the God who sees gave her a future. A broken prince tended sheep for 40 silent years, and the voice in the fire commissioned a deliverer. A nation of slaves walked into the blistering heat, and the psychological chains of an empire were shattered in the dust. An exhausted prophet begged to die under a broom tree, and the sheer silence put him back on his feet. A starving king faced the tempter in the white sand, and the kingdoms of the world lost their grip. Of scrolls. The most profound transformations never happen in the palace. They do not happen in the city square. Same empty landscape. Same forge. Same God. But here is the part I keep coming back to. The stuttering shepherd. Moses spends 4 decades watching his royal identity evaporate in the Midianite sun. He loses the heavy gold signet ring of Pharaoh. He loses the polished rhetoric of the court. And when he is finally empty, when all he has left to hold is a rough, wooden staff covered in dirt, that is exactly when the bush bursts into flame. If you are in a season where the landscape of your life has suddenly gone quiet, where the resources feel scarce and the isolation feels heavy, do not assume you have been abandoned. Do not panic. Do not try to build a golden calf just to have something you can control. The wilderness is not a punishment for your failure. It is the MIDBAR. It is the place of speaking. The noise of the city has been stripped away so you can finally hear the whisper. If this opens something in you, subscribe and leave a comment. Even one word helps. Share this with someone who feels like they are wandering right now, waiting for the silence to break, happen in the dust. To feel the weight of this pattern, you have to step into the heat of the pray for us as we keep digging into these texts. And may the God who has never once abandoned a runaway in the sand walk with you into the absolute quiet and forge you into something the empire could never build. Very first wilderness journey recorded in the text. It does not belong to a great patriarch. It does not belong. A prince raised on Egyptian delicacies sits on a jagged ridge, watching sheep chew on thorn bushes for 40 silent years, to a conquering king. It belongs to a runaway servant girl who did not even want to be there. She is an Egyptian slave running from a cruel mistress, pregnant with a child she didn't ask for, stepping out of the fertile valleys and into the brutal, blinding expanse of the desert of Shur. She is sitting beside a desolate spring. She expects to die in the sand, but the detail hiding beside that water is about to rewrite the map. The first person to encounter God in the wilderness of the biblical narrative is not a holy man. Genesis 16 records the domestic dysfunction of Abram and Sarai. They are wealthy, powerful, and impatient. When the promised heir does not arrive on their schedule, they use their Egyptian slave, Hagar, as a surrogate. When the tension in the camp becomes unbearable, Hagar is abused, and she flees. She heads toward Shur, the harsh borderlands between the promised land of Canaan and her homeland of Egypt. She is caught in the brutal in-between. The air out here pulls the moisture from your skin. Every step sinks into the loose grit of the Negev desert, the heat radiating off the white limestone until the horizon blurs. A prophet sprints into the blinding white salt flats, curling up under a broom tree and begging for his own heart to stop. In the ancient Near East, a runaway slave, without a household, was a dead woman walking. The wilderness was the realm of jackals and scavengers, a place completely devoid of civilization's protection. When Sarai drove Hagar out, it was essentially a death sentence. But the biblical author is doing something subversive here. God meets her in the wasteland. He does not offer her a shallow comfort, but he gives her a profound promise regarding her unborn son, Ishmael, and then Hagar does something unprecedented in the entire scriptural record. She names God, not Abraham, not Moses, an abused Egyptian runaway. She calls him El Roi, you are the God who sees me. In the tents of Abram, Hagar was invisible. She was an instrument, a womb, a piece of property to be leveraged for someone else's legacy. In the camp, Hagar was defined entirely by her utility. But in the barrenness of the desert, the social structures collapse. The hierarchy evaporates. There is nothing but the sand, the sky, and a God who pays attention to the discarded. The wilderness is not the place where God abandons the broken. It is the place where the noise of the city drops away long enough for them to be seen. A nation of former slaves stares at a column of fire in the freezing midnight air, trapped between chariot wheels and a barren horizon. Hagar's story establishes the blueprint for every desert narrative that follows. The desert is where the false identities given by the culture are forcefully stripped away. It is the environment where you learn who you are when you are no longer useful to anyone else's agenda. Hagar walks out of the desert, carrying a revelation. But centuries later, another runaway from Egypt will walk into a different desert carrying a lethal secret. And what he finds burning in the sand will not just name God, it will unmake an empire. Moses buries an Egyptian in the sand. The blood is on his hands, and the panic is in his chest. He runs. He runs until the chariots are a memory, until the Nile is a ghost. He trades the polished marble floors of Pharaoh's palace for the jagged, wind-scoured rocks of Midian. He trades the fine linen of a prince for the coarse, heavy wool of a shepherd. He trades the deafening noise of an empire, the military parades, the political maneuvering, the clinking of gold for a silence so absolute it rings in the ears. And then, time stops. 40 years pass. 40 years of waking up in the freezing air before dawn. 40 years of pulling thorns out of hooves. 40 years of watching the sun bake the red dirt into cracking clay. 40 years of becoming a nobody. And a newly baptized king steps away from the cool river water, walking alone into the vibrating heat waves of Judea with no bread in his hands. If you are reading this as a modern person, you see a tragedy. You see a man of immense potential, highly educated, fiercely passionate, wasting his prime years watching sheep eat scrub brush. You assume God is punishing him for the murder, but the 40 years are not a sentence. They are a stripping. Egypt taught Moses how to command. Midian teaches him how to listen. Egypt taught him that authority comes from a sword and a title. Midian teaches him that authority comes from the dirt. Egypt gave him a savior complex, an arrogance that believed he could liberate his people by his own violent strength. The wilderness burns that arrogance down to the ash. By the time Moses reaches his 80th year, the Egyptian prince is dead. The man who thought he could conquer the world cannot even speak without a stutter. He is empty. He is hollowed out, which means he is finally ready. He is walking the flock near Horeb. He sees a bush blazing against the barren rocks. The wood crackles. The heat radiates against his weathered face. The smell of smoke fills the dry air, but the leaves do not turn to ash. God speaks from the fire. He tells Moses to take off his sandals, because the dirt he is standing on, the exact same dirt he has been walking on for 4 decades, is holy ground. The revelation happens in the dust. Sand, thorns, salt, fire, hunger. The geography repeats. The isolation is identical. Same landscape again and again. But why here? Why does the creator of the cosmos bypass the towering temples of Memphis, the grand architecture of human achievement, to commission his deliverer in a forgotten patch of scrub brush? To answer that, you cannot look at a map. You have to look at the letters beneath the text. Look at the rough parchment of Exodus chapter 3. Verse 1. Moses is keeping the flock of his father-in-law, leading the sheep to the west side of the wilderness. The English word used in almost every modern translation for this landscape is wilderness or desert. But the word Moses actually wrote down in the Hebrew scroll is the noun MIDBAR. It appears nearly 270 times in the Old Testament, representing the vast, uncultivated, dangerous grazing lands beyond the city walls. It is a place of scorpions and sharp rocks. But to understand how an ancient Israelite heard this word, you have to look at the root underneath it. MIDBAR is built on the Hebrew root dabar, and dabar means to speak. It means a word. The linguistic connection here is staggering. The ancient Hebrews did not name the desert after its lack of water. They did not name it after its heat or its barrenness. They named it after its acoustic properties. The Midbar is literally the place of speaking. In Egypt, there was only the deafening roar of production, the cracking of the overseer's whip, the heavy grinding of the millstone. Most people read these stories and assume the wilderness is a geography of punishment. We look at the dry places of the Bible, the endless rhythmic chanting to the sun god Ra. You could not hear your own thoughts, let alone the quiet whisper of the Creator. It was a culture of total acoustic saturation. The Midbar is the environment where all the competing noise of the empire has been forcibly stripped away, so that a single voice can finally be heard. That route changes everything. The wilderness is not the geography of divine absence. It is the geography of divine communication. You see this exact linguistic play used centuries later by the prophet Hosea. He is speaking to a rebellious, distracted Israel, a nation that has become addicted to the noise of foreign idols and political alliances. God looks at his wandering people and says in Hosea chapter 2, verse 14, "Therefore I am now going to allure her. I will lead her into the wilderness and speak tenderly to her." He leads her into the Midbar so he can dabar. He brings her into the absolute silence so she can finally hear. If feeling the weight of these ancient words is shifting how you read your own dry seasons, you're exactly who this channel is for. Drop a thought in the comments and hit subscribe, because every week we dig into the biblical languages to uncover what got buried in translation. So, a stuttering shepherd listens to the voice in the fire, and see a divine timeout for the disobedient. We view the desert as a wasteland, meant to break the stubborn. He goes back to the noise of Egypt. He shatters the chains of the empire, and he leads millions of people out into the vast, silent expanse. But stepping past the border of the kingdom was only the first phase. Getting Israel out of Egypt took a single night, but getting Egypt out of Israel is going to require an entirely different kind of fire. The sea crashes shut. The chariots sink. The screaming stops. Silence falls over 2 million people standing on the eastern shore. The salt spray dries on their faces. They are free, but they are hungry. The skin cracks on their lips. The wind whips coarse sand into their eyes. The sun beats down on a massive, disorganized crowd of people who only know how to take orders from a man with a whip. They do not know how to be a nation. They only know how to survive. Manna falls like frost on the camp. They gather it. Water explodes from a flint rock. They drink it. A mountain shakes with thick black smoke. They tremble. Quail drops from the sky by the thousands. They gorge. The rhythm is relentless. The cycle is brutal. Complaint, provision, rebellion, consequence, panic, silence, mercy. When Moses delays on the mountain, they panic. A place where God sends people when they have failed the test or missed the mark. And it does carry. They throw their Egyptian gold into the fire. They mold a calf. They try to recreate the heavy, tangible, predictable gods of the empire they just left, because the invisible God of the desert is too wild, too unstructured, too silent. Most people read the book of Numbers and see a punitive death march. They see a petty deity punishing a complaining people with 40 years of wandering. But the 40 years are not a penalty for complaining. They are the required gestation period for a new kind of human. A slave cannot inherit a kingdom. A slave only knows how to hoard manna before it rots. A slave only knows how to fear the master. A slave will look at the fortified walls of Canaan, see the giants in the land, and beg to go back to making bricks, because predictable chains will always feel safer than unpredictable freedom. Egypt is not just a location. It is a neurological wiring. You cannot command it away. You have to walk it out. Their sandals do not wear out. The cloud shades their skin by day. The fire warms them in the freezing desert night. The bitter water turns sweet on their tongues. God sustains them. But the old generation still has to drop into the dust. The men who carried the whip scars. The women who remembered the garlic and leeks of Goshen.